Hey guys, welcome back to another video. I have a question for you all today. Did you right now freely choose to click on this video, or was it all predetermined? Today we will lay out all the arguments and you can decide that bit for yourself. Firstly, I would like to dive into what the Catholic Church point of view is regarding free will, since I think that it would be a good general basis for what theological beliefs most people hold regarding free will, at least in the Abrahamic faiths and in some others as well. I want to do this because I think that arguing for free will through a strictly materialist worldview is a completely different box of frogs that we will have to investigate later in this video. If you have another religious way of viewing this that is exempt from the arguments given, please mention it down below, as I would be quite interested in learning all about it. In the Catholic Church, through scripture and other church documents, people are given moral responsibility, the ability to deliberate things, make their own choices, and either resist or work with grace. Grace is the help that God tries to give us in the form of a gift. This idea is seen as free will, and it allows people to, in other words, make sense of their lives and have a say in their own fate. In Catholicism and most Abrahamic worldviews, God is omnipresent, which means that he is present everywhere, omniscient, which means that he knows everything in the past, present, and future, and omnipotent, meaning that his power is limitless. This raises an issue when it comes to free will, because although in theory we are free to choose what we will, God has divine foreknowledge, which means that in the moment of creation, he decided to create a world in which he would already know which individuals will freely reject them and be damned for eternity. God's plan can't change. Does that mean you really have the freedom to choose as you do, or are you predetermined to pick what God already knew you would pick when he made the world in a particular way? And furthermore, how would that allow you to be punished or compensated by your choice? In many theological works, there is a distinction between something called sufficient grace and efficacious grace. Sufficient grace is when you are given the option to do good through God's gift, while on the other hand, efficacious grace is when the call to good is so irresistible that you have a guaranteed chance of doing good and also possibly even being saved. Efficacious grace is the only way that one can be saved, through it being a gift of God. If this is the case, then what say do you have in whether or not God chooses to give you the gift of efficacious grace in order to save you? It's ultimately God's decision. Now, according to St. Thomas Aquinas, God is the first cause of every creature, which initiates motion and everything else that takes place in the universe. If God is the one who puts everything into motion, then your own will is a product of God, and it is dependent and determined by God as a primary cause, and everything you do as well. Some classical theologians also believe that fallen humans cannot perform good deeds or choose God without his divine help, which is once again tying into the idea of grace. This implies that because of our fallenness, we are fully dependent on God in order to follow his path. This brings me on to the last argument regarding this part, which is included in all the rest. God's single divine plan is perfect, and nothing can fall outside of it. If that is the case, then although your choice is real, it is predetermined and already known to take place in the divine plan. Now, how could the Catholic Church argue against this? Well, you could follow the same idea that it already states, which is that people's wills are dependent on God as a primary cause, but your will in itself as a secondary cause is still free to the extent that it's bounded by God's will. And in a weird way, you can't be free. Nothing is free in God's will, but your will is in a way more free than most of the other things that take place. It is ultimately you that decides, even though even if it's in a situation where the help is way too good to ignore, which limits your freedom. Now, how would a materialist thinker defend an idea like free will? Basically, what I found to be somewhat appealing is that we can all for certain say that we feel like we have free will, and that is important. We can decide between multiple options, deal with dilemmas up front, and change our minds, and a plethora of other things in our day to day lives. The idea is that it wouldn't be a complete free will, similar to the one mentioned in the Catholic argument, since we can act on our will freely, but we cannot really will our will. Although you choose to change your mind, your will decides that, and you cannot really control what your will decides to do. There are ways that you could argue that you could, but ultimately, if, for example, I choose to follow a discipline in order to change what my will wills in my day to day, like going to the gym, I am still ultimately willing going to the gym and following a discipline, which is not something that is in my control to will. It just happens. Now, the other issue is that in a materialist worldview, the reason why something takes place has to be a material cause. Um, and in the materialist worldview, other than there being a evolutionary or psychological reason behind it, there really couldn't be anything else. Um, Basically, the brain tends to be a filtering mechanism, according to this worldview, that alters all of our behavior in a way that is useful toward our survival. But as most things that are evolutionary adaptations, the fact that they can be useful at some points doesn't mean that they necessarily help us understand the truth better. In this case, free will could very well be an illusion in order to understand the world in a way that wouldn't require us to know every single cause that led us to being here. Even if there were quantum randomness involved, it is all caused by a prior deterministic state which has nothing to do with it being your choice. So that's it for today. Please leave me your thoughts down below. If you agree, let me know. If you disagree and you have another point of view that I haven't mentioned, please leave me a message down below. Thank you.